After the second half of the 4th century BCE, many adhered to the teachings of the authors in the classical period, given their significant impact on society. Plato established his following at the Academy in Athens, which was later destroyed beyond repair by a siege in the 1st century CE, though his teachings enjoyed mainstream acceptance even well into the Middle Ages. As a notorious public figure, his own academy had different periods and perspectives, and different groups even had differing interpretations of his works. These were the academic skeptics known as the Eclectics, and later the Neoplatonists. Aristotle and his followers, the Peripatetics, gathered in the Lyceum, which purportedly lasted until the 3rd century CE, though probably only until the 1st. This was an interesting phenomenon, a significant rise in the popularity of schools of thought rather than singular figures. The death of Alexander the Great was also an important event in the Hellenistic period. Alexander's expeditions to the Middle West exposed philosophy to different classes and cultures of people during that epoch, and during that time philosophy was not limited only to intellectuals, but rather was accessible to individuals from many walks of life. Epictetus, born a slave man; Marcus Aurelius, an emperor; Hypatia of Alexandria, a woman; and Diogenes the Cynic, an exiled citizen of Sinope living in poverty in Athens, are well-known examples of this. Beyond these there were the Stoics, Epicureans, Skeptics, Neo-Pythagoreans, and other schools of thought, and they were very popular during these periods. More than an investigation about reality, philosophy was viewed as a way of living, and these schools would unite people with a shared worldview. Let's take a brief look at some of these groups. First, the Peripatetics were commonly thought to be named after Aristotle's habit of teaching while he walked around, as peripatetikos meant itinerant in ancient Greek. But this actually referred to the peripatoi, or walkways where their public meetings happened in the Lyceum, a temple to Apollo Lycaeus. They continued studying and spreading Aristotle's teachings and investing in scientific investigation, so no original or significantly different theories or schools arose from them, except for some developments in logic, as we shall see in a later tutorial. This is in stark contrast with Plato's private academy, where diverse perspectives were encouraged by its founder, and it thus hosted several different versions of his teachings long after his death. The first significant deviation from Plato was the establishment of academic skepticism, a part of the broader movement, skepticism, encompassing a few schools of thought between the late 4th century BCE until the 3rd CE. Academic skepticism formulates Plato's theories into a more Socratic focus. Though knowledge was possible, it is unreachable as we are limited by our senses. Practical moderation was their focus, as the sage would be aware of their tenets and acted on plausibility, unlike the fool who would falsely presuppose true knowledge of things. Socrates' method of intense questioning would be taken to the extreme in order to raise doubt on all positive affirmations. They were in constant feud with the Stoics and Epicureans, and many developments in all three were in response to one another. The original skeptic movement, however, was introduced by Pyrrho of Elis, influenced by the atomists, and later influencing the Pyrrhonian movement as a whole. He traveled along with Alexander the Great in his conquest of the West, and probably to some extent was also influenced by Western and Buddhist philosophy. Pyrrho denied that definite knowledge about the nature of things was possible. For him, happiness was only achievable with this realization, following a tranquility of the mind. According to him, sensory experience was an unreliable source of knowledge, because our senses can only apprehend what and how we perceive things. In other words, it gives us a limited impression of reality. Of course, we can talk about whether it is raining or not, the color of the grass, or whether honey tastes sweet, but these statements are reports on how we perceive things, not statements about what is true or not in reality. According to him, those philosophers who believe that they can apprehend reality itself are mistaken and were called dogmatists, because they ground belief on philosophical dogmas that can't be questioned. According to skepticism, a dogmatic belief springs anxiety in the mind because it can't be proven true. Anxiety of the mind, in turn, makes it impossible for someone to attain happiness and fulfillment in life. The Greek word skepsis means inquiry, and when inquiring, the skeptic sees that there is no justification for any dogmatic belief, and that the only option is to suspend judgment about things that can't be proven true, neither affirming nor denying them. Doing this while inquiring, he found tranquility of the mind, free from any dogmatic beliefs, and thus became fulfilled and happy. The movement had a strong revival in the 1st century BCE, as Anicedemus was dissatisfied with academic skepticism, lasting until Sextus Empiricus in the 3rd century CE, whose writings would strongly influence 16th century skepticism. They were crucial for the development of epistemology, being the first to criticize induction, deduction, and the nature of knowledge itself. The Pyrrhonists then differed from the academic skeptics in that they posited that nothing said regarding knowledge could ever be true or false, and so we must be silent on the nature of things in order to reach happiness. The Stoics and Epicureans were also some of the main schools in this period, often pictured in contrast with each other. Both focused on practices intertwined with their ethics and other perspectives. The Stoics were a development from the Cynics, who understood that common sense and social norms were irrelevant regarding happiness, which was only achievable through virtue by living in accordance with nature. The Stoics, from the Greek stoa, a portico or covered walk, directly referred to not only where they met, but to their similar philosophy. One must be absent of passions to be unwavering, like a stoa. Emotions are synonymous with false judgments, and material or worldly things cannot be inherently good or evil, only one's actions. They believed that the universe itself was rational, and hence to be guided by reason is to be guided by the universe, that is, to be guided by nature. So to achieve happiness, one needs to be guided by reason, and reason will direct one to a natural goal as a human being, a virtuous life. This is greatly encapsulated by Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations. Revere the ultimate power in the universe. This is what makes use of all things and directs all things. But similarly, revere the ultimate power in yourself. This is akin to that other power. Of course, it's not easy to purge our passions. However, the Stoic path recommends acting rationally and making this a habit. This will lead us to a virtuous life that will in turn be free from the turmoil of passions and in harmony with nature. The wise would live thusly, and only the fools would cater to their emotions, or the pleasures and luxuries of life. Seneca and Epictetus, famous Stoics, even went as far as affirming that a sage would not suffer any misfortune, as they would never be subject to emotions in any way. Epicureans, on the other hand, veered in the opposite direction. To them, true happiness comes only from enjoying the pleasures of life. Named after its founder, Epicurus, it was an early form of hedonism, but not so unbridled as many came to think. A happy life of pleasures for them would only be achieved by careful, rational examination toward understanding what pleasure means and avoiding pain, as exaggeration in taking pleasures may also lead to suffering. In other words, the pleasure that they advocate is not a transitory one in which every desire needs to be satisfied, but rather a state of pleasure which lasted a lifetime. Additionally, intellectual pleasure was regarded as greatly superior to bodily and material pleasure. Death, the gods, passions, politics, and desire itself only served to disrupt one's life, and were thus to be eschewed. Contrary to a common understanding of hedonism, their focus was on the lack of pain and suffering rather than going after pleasure itself. Also, contrary to the Stoics, Epicureans understood the role of virtues as instrumental, without any intrinsic value, but rather as means with which to attain a pleasurable life. Most of these schools of thought lasted well into the Roman period, though in constant decline. After its skeptic period, Plato's Academy went into a more dogmatic phase, so to speak, with eclecticism around the 2nd century BCE until the 3rd CE, where flaws and merits of many previous perspectives were discussed and embraced. Skepticism was still a factor, as Cicero still considered himself a skeptic, but many Stoic and Peripatetic doctrines were embraced together with Platonic and Socratic ones. This dogmatic and eclectic trend saw the rise of Neo-Pythagoreanism in the 1st century CE, which revived not only the cult-like philosophy and behavior of the Pythagoreans, as it promoted Pythagoras as a divine figure who would have invented philosophy itself without any evidence whatsoever. And since all theories would have come from his thinking, many elements from several authors and positions were conjoined with adoration of traditional Greek gods. Neoplatonism arose thereafter from the 3rd century CE to the 7th, the second and final major school of thought to rise in this period. Though they were indeed Platonists, their school also embraced most traditions of the Hellenistic and classical periods, denouncing only Epicureanism and elements of Stoicism. They revered the past intellectualism over empiricism, embracing mind over matter principles and a monist belief in the indescribable One, the first substance ever, beyond human understanding and inherently good. True happiness came only through contemplation, which could lead to our unification with it. This shared many elements with rising Christianity, and over time its more pagan beliefs were forgotten to give way to the new Christian world. The ancient world transitioned into the medieval period, a strongly religious period even in the context of philosophy. In the next tutorial, we will check out some innovations in logic that occurred in this late ancient period, and then we will begin analyzing medieval philosophy so we can see just how different philosophy became during those times.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.